I stood among the towering figures of the United Terran Fleet's War Council, a room thick with tension and the faint scent of burnt coffee. It wasn't just another meeting of military minds, it was a reckoning. The table was holographic, displaying the scattered remains of the Serenity and the calculated trajectories of the Targath fleet that had ambushed it. Every person in that room carried a weight on their shoulders, but the heaviest of all sat squarely on Admiral Kane. Kane wasn't a man of pleasantries or patience. His presence alone could silence a room, his scarred face a testament to battles fought and lessons learned. When he spoke, his voice was low and deliberate, the kind of voice that carried authority without needing to shout. "We've extended our hand to these bastards for too long," he growled, his fist slamming onto the table hard enough to send a ripple through the hologram, "and they've spat on it every single time. Enough is enough." The council murmured their agreement, but murmurs weren't good enough for Kane. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room like a predator sizing up his pack. "I don't want to hear cautious strategies or diplomatic options," he snapped. "I want to hear how we bury them so deep that their kind thinks twice before looking at Earth again." The room erupted into a flurry of ideas, plans, and calculated risks. Each admiral and commander had their own approach, their own angle of attack. Some suggested targeting key outposts, others advocated for an all-out assault on the Targath homeworld. I stood at the edge, a mere lieutenant commander, listening and taking mental notes, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about sending a message. Humanity had been the underdog in every major galactic conflict for centuries. We were the scrappy newcomers, the species that clawed its way out of its cradle to join the stars. But this was different. The Serenity wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of everything we tried to achieve through diplomacy, and the Targath had annihilated it like it was nothing. The discussion grew heated, but it was Kane who brought it to a close. "We don't just hit them," he declared. "We cripple them. Supply lines, fleets, infrastructure, everything. We'll make them regret the day they ever thought humanity was weak." Orders were issued, ships were mobilized, and the fleet began to stir. I was assigned to the Retribution, a name that now seemed more fitting than ever. As I boarded the ship, I felt the weight of the mission settle on my shoulders. The crew was somber but focused, their movements precise, their faces hard. We all knew what was at stake. The first attack was scheduled for 0400 hours, a stealth operation against a Targath supply depot orbiting a barren moon. It was the beginning of something much larger, a fire that would spread through the galaxy and forever change how humanity was seen. Kane's voice echoed in my mind as I prepared for the mission. They wanted a war. Fine. Let's give them one they'll never forget. The silence of space had always been a comfort to me, but as our fleet moved toward its first objective, that silence felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Orders were whispered across the comms, terse and precise, every word a piece of a larger plan. The Retribution glided through the void, a predator stalking its prey, its engines humming so quietly you could almost believe we weren't there at all. Our first target was a Targath supply depot, an isolated station orbiting a barren moon in the Izylar system. Intelligence reports indicated it was a critical node in their logistics network, a hub for refueling and resupplying their forward fleets. Taking it out wouldn't just disrupt their operations, it would send a message. As we approached, the depot came into view, a massive structure with angular designs that screamed Targath efficiency. It was surrounded by a handful of frigates, their patrol patterns as predictable as clockwork. Kane's strategy was simple: strike fast, strike hard, and leave nothing behind. I stood at my station, monitoring the tactical readouts as the operation began. The Retribution launched its first wave, a squadron of stealth bombers armed with EMP warheads. They slipped through the Targath defenses like ghosts, undetected until it was too late. The EMPs detonated in perfect synchronization, plunging the depot and its escort ships into darkness. Then came the main assault. The Retribution and its accompanying fleet emerged from the shadow of the moon, weapons blazing. The Targath frigates scrambled to respond, their systems sluggish from the EMP blasts. It didn't matter. Our firepower was overwhelming. The depot's defenses came online just as our ground teams began boarding it. Watching the assault unfold on the tactical display was like witnessing a storm tear through a city. Explosions lit up the station's exterior, its hull buckling under the relentless barrage. Team Alpha has secured the central hub, a voice crackled over the comms. Resistance is heavier than expected, but we're holding. I could hear the tension in the officer's voice, but there was no hesitation. Humans didn't back down. Not now, not ever. Kane's orders were clear: leave nothing salvageable. The teams worked with brutal efficiency, planting charges at critical junctures and extracting data from the station's servers. The Targath response was as predictable as it was futile. Reinforcements arrived just as we were making our exit, a trio of cruisers dropping out of warp with guns blazing. But we were ready. The Retribution's main cannon fired in a blinding flash, its energy beam slicing through one of the cruisers like a knife through butter. The remaining two hesitated, then withdrew. As the depot erupted in a massive explosion, the fleet regrouped. Kane's voice came over the comms, calm and steady. "Good work, everyone. Let them know what we left behind." The message was simple, scrawled into the wreckage with precision laser cutters. "You started this." We didn't need to say more. The galaxy would soon understand what those words meant. For now, the silence of space returned, but it wasn't comforting. It was the kind of silence that precedes an unstoppable storm. The Vega Nebula was a sight to behold, an expanse of swirling blues and purples, laced with shimmering streaks of starlight. It would have been beautiful if it weren't about to become a graveyard. The Targath had committed their largest fleet to intercept us here, a desperate bid to halt humanity's advance. They called it Operation Apex, as if to assert their dominance, but to us, it was just another battle. From the bridge of the Retribution, I watched their armada emerge from the nebula, ships lined in tight formation. Hundreds of vessels, from sleek interceptors to hulking dreadnoughts, their hulls bristling with weaponry designed to tear through fleets. They weren't just here to fight, they were here to annihilate us. The tension on our bridge was palpable. Crew members moved with purpose, their faces grim but focused. The comms crackled with updates from the rest of the fleet, ships reporting readiness, weapons primed, shields at full capacity. Admiral Kane stood at the center of it all, his expression unreadable. "Let them come," he said, his voice low and steady. "We'll show them what happens when you corner humanity." The Targath made the first move, launching a swarm of fighters in a coordinated wave. On the tactical display, they looked like a swarm of angry bees, converging on our formation with deadly precision. Our interceptors met them head-on, weaving through the chaos with unparalleled skill. Explosions erupted in the void, silent but blinding, as ships from both sides were torn apart. Then came the missiles, hundreds of them, streaking toward our ships in a coordinated barrage. The Retribution's point defense systems roared to life, beams of light cutting through the darkness to intercept the incoming projectiles. Some missiles got through, slamming into our shields and rattling the ship, but the armor held. Kane gave the order to counterattack, and the fleet moved as one. It was a sight to behold, cruisers flanking the enemy formation, destroyers unleashing torrents of railgun fire, carriers deploying waves of bombers. The Retribution's main cannon fired, a searing beam of energy that lanced through a Targath battlecruiser, splitting it in two. The Targath fought fiercely, their tactics precise, their discipline unwavering. But they didn't understand us. They didn't understand that humans don't fight wars the way other species do. For us, war is chaos, and we thrive in chaos. When their dreadnought pushed forward, a massive lumbering beast of a ship, it seemed unstoppable. Its weapons tore through one of our cruisers, reducing it to a fiery husk. But Kane didn't flinch. "Target their engines," he ordered, his tone calm but resolute. The Retribution and two destroyers focused fire, hammering the dreadnought's rear with relentless precision. Its shields faltered, then failed, and the ship shuddered as its engines detonated in a blinding explosion. The Targath began to falter. Their formations broke apart, their commanders scrambling to regroup. It was too late. We pressed the advantage, dismantling their fleet piece by piece until all that remained was wreckage and silence. When it was over, Kane sent a transmission on all frequencies. This is what happens when you provoke humanity. Consider this your only warning. The Vega Nebula would never be the same. Its beauty was now marred by the wreckage of war, a testament to the fury of a species that refused to bow. Word of the Vega Nebula battle spread faster than the debris from the Targath fleet could drift. In the days that followed, humanity's victory wasn't just whispered across the galaxy, it was shouted. Broadcasts from neutral systems dissected the battle, replaying footage captured by distant observers. The sight of the Retribution carving through the enemy armada became a symbol of something the galaxy had never associated with humanity dominance. For centuries, we'd been the newcomers, the species that scrabbled its way to relevance in a universe ruled by older, more established powers. We were the traders, the diplomats, the scavengers, scrappy and resourceful, but never a threat. That perception died in the Vega Nebula. The fear began to spread, subtle at first, like a shadow creeping across a room. On the Retribution, the crew worked tirelessly, repairing damage and preparing for the next engagement. But it wasn't just the fleet that felt the shift. At every neutral station we stopped for resupply, you could see it in the eyes of the merchants and station workers. They didn't meet our gaze like they used to. Their postures were stiffer, their words more cautious. Some gave us wide berths, others avoided us altogether. I overheard one conversation while waiting for a supply shipment. A Crevan merchant, his scaled hands trembling, spoke in hushed tones to a Zathari trader. "You saw what they did to the Targath," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Imagine what they'd do if someone attacked us." The Zathari nodded, her three eyes darting nervously toward our docking bay. "They're not like before," she muttered. "They've changed." I didn't need to eavesdrop to know what they were talking about. They weren't wrong. We had changed. The galaxy had pushed us too far, and we'd finally pushed back. Back on the ship, I joined a few officers in the mess hall. The atmosphere was subdued, the usual banter replaced by quiet conversations. Lieutenant Vasquez, one of the gunnery officers, shook his head as he stared into his drink. "I used to think we were just trying to survive out here," he said. "But now, feels like we're something else." He wasn't alone in that sentiment. The victories we were racking up weren't just about winning battles, they were reshaping humanity's place in the galaxy. Each engagement sent a ripple of fear through our enemies, and even our allies. The Targath weren't silent either. Their broadcasts, once filled with bravado and propaganda, had taken on a frantic tone. They accused us of barbarism, of fighting with a ferocity that defied reason. They claimed we were unpredictable, dangerous, a threat to galactic stability. They weren't entirely wrong. By the time we reached our next target, a Targath manufacturing hub deep in their territory, we'd already heard of systems pulling back their borders, withdrawing ships, or opening diplomatic channels to Terran representatives. They didn't want to be next. I'd heard Admiral Kane call it a war of attrition, but it was more than that. It was a war of fear. We weren't just defeating the Targath, we were dismantling the idea that humanity was a species to be underestimated. Fear is a powerful weapon, and for the first time in my career, I understood how terrifying humanity could be when it was wielded deliberately. The Targath homeworld loomed before us like a dark jewel nestled amidst a sea of stars. It was breathtaking, with its sprawling cities that shimmered like veins of silver across a deep green surface. Their planet was surrounded by orbital stations, defensive platforms, and an armada of warships, each one ready to rain fire down on any would-be invaders. It was their sanctuary, their stronghold, the beating heart of their empire. And we were here to break it. The fleet emerged from hyperspace with precision, every ship in position, every maneuver rehearsed down to the second. The Retribution sat at the center of the formation, a leviathan in a sea of steel, bristling with weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Around it, destroyers, cruisers, and carriers formed an impenetrable wall, their sleek designs glinting in the light of the distant star. The Targath were waiting for us, their ships already forming defensive lines. They had been preparing for this, rallying every available vessel to defend their home. From the bridge of the Retribution, I could see the tactical display lighting up with enemy signatures. Thousands of them. It was the largest fleet we'd encountered, a final, desperate stand. Admiral Kane stood at the helm, his face as unreadable as ever. "This is it," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The last battle. They don't get a second chance. Make every shot count." The order was given, and all hell broke loose. The first salvo came from the Targath, a barrage of plasma torpedoes and railgun fire that lit up the void in a deadly cascade. Our shields absorbed the brunt of it, the ship trembling under the sheer force. But we were ready. Our fleet responded in kind, a coordinated wave of missiles and energy beams tearing into their front lines. From my station, I watched as the tactical display became a storm of red and blue, each icon representing a life, a story, now caught in the chaos of war. Fighters and bombers swarmed like insects, weaving between capital ships as they delivered their payloads. Explosions bloomed like flowers in the darkness, each one a silent scream. The Retribution's main cannon fired, a beam of pure energy that lanced through a Targath dreadnought, cutting it in half. The wreckage spun out of control, colliding with one of their cruisers in a fiery explosion. Around us, the fleet pressed forward, smashing through their defensive lines with relentless precision. The orbital stations fired on us, their weapons blazing in desperation. But we had the numbers, the firepower, and, most importantly, the fury. One by one, the stations fell, their remains joining the growing graveyard of Targath ships. As the battle raged on, our ground forces deployed. Drop pods rained down on the planet like meteors, carrying troops and mechanized units to the surface. Their mission was clear: disable key infrastructure, neutralize resistance, and leave the Targath with nothing. When their central command station erupted in a massive explosion, the message was clear. The Targath fleet broke, their remaining ships scattering like leaves in the wind. The homeworld was ours, its defenders crushed, its empire in ruins. Kane's voice echoed through the fleet's comms, calm and unyielding. "No mercy," he said. "They brought this upon themselves." As I stared out at the burning remnants of their once mighty armada, I realized we hadn't just won a war. We'd reshaped the galaxy. Fear wasn't just a weapon anymore, it was our legacy. The aftermath of the battle was eerily quiet. The once mighty Targath homeworld, so vibrant and full of life, now lay shrouded in smoke and ash. Fires dotted the landscape, visible even from orbit, marking the scars of orbital bombardments and ground engagements. The defensive platforms that had once circled the planet were now nothing more than drifting wreckage. The silence wasn't peace, it was submission. On the bridge of the Retribution, the crew moved with a solemn efficiency. There was no celebration, no victorious cheers. This wasn't a triumph anyone wanted to revel in, it was a necessity. Admiral Kane stood at the central console, his face lit by the pale glow of the tactical display. He surveyed the aftermath with the same cold, calculating demeanor he always had, but even he couldn't mask the weight of what we'd done. Reports filtered in from the surface. Entire cities had surrendered without a fight after seeing the destruction of their orbital defenses. Our ground forces moved methodically, securing key infrastructure and gathering intelligence. The Targath soldiers who remained loyal were few and far between, pockets of resistance that were quickly crushed. Most of their people had simply given up. I stood at my station, monitoring communications as the fleet coordinated the occupation. Messages from ground commanders painted a picture of a society in free fall. Civilians cowered in shelters, their leaders captured or dead, their military shattered. The once proud Targath Empire was no more, reduced to a scattered collection of worlds with no central authority. Kane finally broke the silence. "They underestimated us," he said, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of anger. "They thought they could provoke us, attack us, kill our people, and walk away unscathed. Let this be a lesson to every species in the galaxy. Humanity isn't prey. We're not weak. And we will not be provoked without consequence." His words hung heavy in the air. They weren't just meant for us, they were meant for everyone listening. Every neutral observer, every allied faction, every enemy state. Humanity had made its mark, and it was one that couldn't be ignored. I found myself staring out the viewport, watching as the debris field from the battle drifted lazily in the planet's orbit. Among the wreckage were fragments of Targath's ships, shattered defensive platforms, and even pieces of our own fleet. It was a graveyard, a stark reminder of the cost of this war. Later, I joined a group of officers in the observation deck. The mood was somber, the usual camaraderie replaced by quiet reflection. "Do you think we went too far?" one of them asked, breaking the silence. I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know. The Targath had started this war, but we'd ended it in a way that left no room for doubt or redemption. Maybe I finally said, but they left us no choice. The fleet began to regroup, preparing to leave the system. Our mission was over, but the echoes of what we'd done would ripple through the galaxy for generations. Humanity had shown its strength, its fury, and its resolve. And in doing so, we had changed not just the perception of our species, but the very fabric of galactic politics. The universe would never look at us the same way again. The galaxy didn't return to normal after the fall of the Targath homeworld. It couldn't. The battle had been more than a decisive military engagement, it had been a declaration, one written in fire and blood. Humanity had shown what it was capable of, and the stars themselves seemed to shift in response. Fear wasn't just a ripple anymore, it was a tidal wave, crashing against every species and every power that had once looked down on us. The days following the Targath's surrender were filled with uncertainty. Messages flooded into Terran command, some congratulatory, others laced with thinly veiled concern. A few were outright condemnations, accusing humanity of brutality, of overstepping the bounds of warfare. But the Targath themselves? They were silent. Their leaders were either dead or in custody, their fleets reduced to scrap, their people broken. Whatever protests they might have had, they were too shattered to voice them. The fleet, now scattered across former Targath territories, began the painstaking process of securing our hard-won victory. Colonies were liberated, supply lines redirected, and resistance quashed wherever it appeared. The galaxy watched every move we made, wary of what humanity might do next. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was caution, respect, and a grudging acknowledgement that the species they had once dismissed as insignificant now stood among the great powers of the galaxy. Admiral Kane, though stoic as ever, seemed wearier with each passing day. He had been the face of our retaliation, the architect of our victories, and now the symbol of humanity's newfound strength. But I could see the weight of it all in his eyes, the battles fought, the lives lost, the moral lines crossed in the name of survival. One evening, I found myself in the observation deck again, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. Kane joined me, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed at the void. "Do you think we've done enough?" he asked, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I didn't know how to answer. Enough to end the war? Yes. Enough to change how they see us? Absolutely. He nodded, but there was no satisfaction in his expression. And what will they see? A species that fights back when provoked, or a monster that destroys without mercy? I didn't have an answer for that either. The truth was, we'd become both. Over the weeks, news began to trickle in from across the galaxy. Diplomatic envoys from neutral systems requested audiences with Terran leaders, eager to establish alliances. Former allies of the Targath distanced themselves from the fallen empire, some even seeking to make reparations before we turned our gaze their way. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and humanity now sat at the center of it. But with power came responsibility, and for all our victories, we were left with an unshakable question: what kind of future would we build with the fear we'd inspired? Would we become protectors, guiding the galaxy toward peace, or conquerors, reshaping it in our image? As the Retribution prepared to leave Targath's space for the last time, I realized the answer wasn't just up to leaders like Kane. It was up to all of us. The galaxy had finally seen what happened when humanity lost its temper. Now it was our responsibility to decide what they would see next. The stars stretched out before us, infinite and uncharted. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope amidst the lingering weight of war. We had shown the galaxy our strength. Now we had to prove we were more than that.